The air inside courtroom 3B felt like it hadn't moved in hours, thick with anticipation, dread, and the scent of old wood polish and fear. Officer Marcus Hale sat at the defense table, shoulders square but rigid, his hands clenched beneath the table where no one could see. He didn't blink as the bailiff walked in, a sealed envelope in his hand, the kind that decided destinies. The jury filed in behind him, 12 solemn faces drained of color, and not one of them met Hale's eyes. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman stifled a cry. The hum of cameras recording the proceedings gave the moment a clinical coldness, like this wasn't a man's life on the line, but just another headline to chew through. Across the room, the prosecutor adjusted her blazer with smug precision. She knew what was coming. Everyone did. Hale had been a decorated officer once. 12 years on the force, a spotless record, and a K-9 unit known for its excellence. But everything unraveled when a confidential informant's testimony and a buried file placed him at the center of a tampering scandal involving a powerful developer, a man Hale had investigated. The evidence had turned up too conveniently, his key arrest thrown out, and suddenly Hale was on the stand instead of on patrol. Now he was about to pay for a crime he swore he didn't commit. Titan, his K-9 partner, lay at his feet. Retired from active duty after a shoulder injury, the old German shepherd was still alert, his deep brown eyes scanning the room like he was reading more than faces, like he was smelling the truth itself. He hadn't made a sound the entire trial. Not during the testimonies. Not when Hale's badge was held up as evidence of betrayal. Not when the prosecution displayed doctored footage with the kind of confidence only the guilty should possess. Titan had stayed quiet, loyal, watchful. But now, as Judge Mendel adjusted his glasses and reached for the verdict, something in Titan changed. His ears pricked forward. His chest rose, tense. His eyes locked onto something or someone at the back of the courtroom. Then, just as the judge opened his mouth, the words "guilty on all counts" curling on his tongue, Titan stood. Not a slow rise, but a sharp motion, every muscle coiled. A single piercing bark erupted from his throat. The courtroom jolted, heads turned. The judge froze, eyes wide. Titan barked again, louder, chest rumbling. It wasn't random. It wasn't confusion. It was a signal. Hale turned, heart pounding. "Titan?" he whispered. But the dog wasn't looking at him. He was looking past him, past the judge, the jury, and the cameras, to something Hale hadn't seen yet. Something wrong. And in that breathless instant, the verdict was suspended in midair, forgotten, because a dog that had never broken protocol had just broken the silence. And everything that followed would start with that single bark. Everyone turned to the dog. Titan barked again, sharp and deliberate, each sound cutting through the courtroom with uncanny clarity. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't barking at random. He was warning. His muscles were tense, but not with fear, with certainty. Marcus Hale stood slowly, not sure whether he was reacting as a handler or a man whose entire future now hung by a thread. "Titan," he said under his breath, the name more of a question than a command. But Titan didn't glance at him. His stare was fixed, unblinking, directed toward the back of the gallery. The courtroom, just moments ago primed for a verdict, had turned into a theater of confusion. Cameras swiveled, jurors looked behind them. People in the gallery stood up to see. A man, late 40s, thin build, short-cropped hair, and a gray blazer, was already on his feet. He wasn't looking at the dog. He was looking for an exit. Titan let out a low, guttural snarl, the kind that made trained officers freeze on instinct. Hale's gut twisted. That sound wasn't for show. That sound meant danger. The judge raised a hand to the bailiff. "Wait," he said again, louder this time. "Let's hear the dog." Titan took a single step forward, then another, each movement deliberate. He was closing in on something, or someone, with the confidence of a predator who knows the scent of guilt. The man in the blazer adjusted his collar and forced a smile. "I think your dog's confused," he said, voice strained. I'm just media, got credentials right here. He fumbled for a badge, but even from a distance, something about the motion felt rehearsed, too smooth, too quick. Hale narrowed his eyes. I've never seen him act like this, he said to no one in particular, though his voice carried across the room. Not unless he's certain. The prosecutor stood, visibly annoyed. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This courtroom cannot be derailed by a retired dog. But no one was listening to her anymore. All eyes were on Titan, who now stood rigid, directly in front of the man in the gray blazer. His body was still. Only his lips moved, pulling back to show just a flash of teeth. The man took a step backward, then another. That's when Titan lunged, not to bite, not to attack, but to block. He positioned himself between the man and the exit door, barking again, loud and deliberate, tail stiff, eyes locked. The judge rose from the bench. Who are you? He demanded. And why are you really here? The man hesitated, then smiled weakly. I told you, press. But his voice cracked on the word, and in that moment, something snapped into place for Hale. Titan wasn't just reacting, he was remembering. A scent, a movement. A man who had been close to the case, but never close enough to question. Until now, the man who shouldn't be there. The man didn't flinch at first. He kept his face calm, his body language casual, even as Titan's barking escalated into a frenzy of snarls and growls. I'm Press, he said again, gesturing with a clipped badge that hung too neatly from his lapel. But something about him didn't add up. Not the way he avoided eye contact. Not the faint tremor in his hand as he held the badge. And certainly not the way Titan, who had faced down gangsters, drug lords, and armed suspects without flinching, now acted like this stranger was the one threat that couldn't be ignored. Hale's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Parker, stood from her seat, voice loud and clear. Your Honor, I've been in this courtroom every day. That man wasn't here, not once. He's not Press. A wave of murmurs broke out. The man's posture shifted subtly, just a fraction of an inch backward, away from Titan's unrelenting stare. Then he made his move. He turned, quick and low, a sharp pivot that sent his badge flying. In one breathless heartbeat, he was running down the aisle, knocking over a bench, sending gasps and screams rippling through the room. Chaos erupted like a firestorm. Officers scrambled from the sides. The judge yelled for order, his gavel forgotten. But none of it mattered, because Titan was already moving. The barrier between defense and gallery was nothing to him. One leap and he was airborne, a streak of muscle and instinct, his paws hitting the tile just as the man reached the rear doors. The sound of claws scraping against the floor chased the man's panic like a shadow. Titan, go! Hale shouted, jerking against the guards restraining him. Let him go! He knows something! But Titan didn't need permission. He had already closed the gap. Just as the man slammed his shoulder into the emergency exit, trying to crash through, Titan lunged. Not to attack. No, he was trained for more than that, but to cut off escape. He positioned himself squarely in front of the door, body tense, teeth bared, a snarl building from deep in his chest like a warning from the earth itself. The man skidded to a halt, wide-eyed. Officers closed in behind him, weapons drawn but confused, hesitant. No one wanted to be the one to shoot if it came to that. Titan didn't move, didn't flinch. He held his ground like a soldier in the last stand, his stare drilling into the man with something close to fury. Hale could only watch, heart in his throat, as the truth played out in front of the whole courtroom. The man had run not from fear, but from guilt. And Titan, the one being in that room who couldn't be lied to, had made sure the truth had nowhere left to hide at hidden wire, hidden truth. The moment the man hit the ground, wrestled down by two deputies in Titan's unyielding presence, something small and metallic skittered across the polished floor. It landed with a faint click near the foot of the judge's bench. A black recording device, no bigger than a cigarette lighter, its red light blinking steadily like a silent heartbeat. The courtroom, still crackling with adrenaline, hushed as the bailiff bent to retrieve it. He was recording everything, the bailiff said, lifting it into the light. The judge's brow furrowed. Is it live? The man on the floor said nothing, face twisted into a tight mask of silence, sweat beating at his temple. I want answers, the judge snapped. Now! Still, the man refused to speak. But Hale's attorney, Parker, was already moving. She stepped forward, reaching into her case for a portable speaker. Let's hear it, she said. The room leaned forward as she connected the device and pressed play. At first, only static. Then, voices, low, muffled, but quickly rising in clarity. A man's voice came first, harsh and impatient. You're gonna say what we discussed. I don't care what actually happened. You want that promotion? You'll testify against Hale. You'll bury him. Another voice responded, uncertain, younger. But the evidence doesn't match. He didn't. The first voice cut him off. You want to walk out of here with a pension? Then shut up and follow the script. The courtroom tensed like a held breath. Then came the unmistakable voice of Detective Rollins, the prosecution's star witness. Don't make me remind you what happened to Carter. You want to end up like him? A hush swept through the courtroom like a cold wind. Parker glanced toward the prosecution table where the color had drained from the prosecutor's face. Your Honor, she said, steady and cold. This is clear evidence of witness tampering, intimidation, and perjury. The judge leaned back, stunned. Detective Rollins, this is your voice? Rollins, sitting 2 rows behind the prosecution's bench, stood slowly, mouth opening but no words coming out. His silence was all the confirmation the room needed. A reporter's camera clicked, breaking the stillness. The gallery erupted. Murmurs, gasps, even shouts from a few who'd believed in Hale's guilt until now. Titan, unmoved by the human noise, walked calmly back to Hale's side. He sat, tail giving one soft thump against the floor. Eyes still alert but serene. Hale looked down at his partner and exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. Not in relief, but in recognition. Justice had just stirred. It hadn't spoken with authority or procedure. It had barked. And that bark had brought the truth clawing out of the shadows. A witness recants. The courtroom doors creaked open the next morning with a weight that hadn't been there the day before. The gallery was packed, not just with reporters and legal observers, but with officers Hale once called brothers. People who had avoided eye contact for months now sitting shoulder to shoulder, their silence heavier than the marble pillars that lined the walls. Judge Mendel entered, his robe trailing like a shadow, and behind him, 2 bailiffs escorted Detective Rollins to the witness stand. The same man who had once spoken with unwavering certainty now looked like he was holding his own ribs together with tension. Hale sat stone still, jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the man who had nearly destroyed his life. Titan was at his feet, calm, poised, eyes sharp. The air felt thinner somehow, as if the truth had its own gravity. The judge leaned forward. Detective Rollins, you've been recalled to testify under new evidence and under direct suspicion of perjury. Do you understand the consequences of lying under oath? Rollins nodded once, barely visible. His voice was dry when he answered. Yes, Your Honor. Then begin, the judge said. Tell this court what really happened. The silence stretched. Cameras rolled, pens hovered. Rollins' eyes flicked toward the gallery, then to Hale, then down at his own hands. He swallowed. And finally, he spoke. I didn't think anyone would find out, he said, his voice cracking at the edges. The man you arrested, the one with the recorder, he works for the developer Hale was investigating. A fixer. I've seen him before. A murmur stirred the room, but no one dared interrupt. Rollins' next words came faster, tumbling out like stones falling off a collapsing wall. They came to me with an offer. Money, career advancement, but more than that, threats, not just to me, my family. Said if I didn't bury Hale, if I didn't make the arrest fall apart, I'd end up worse off than Carter. He paused, swallowed hard. So I did what they asked. I planted the evidence in Hale's case file. I coached the witness to give the wrong time. I lied. I did everything they told me to, because I thought they'd protect me. I thought I was smart enough to get away with it. The courtroom was dead silent, but the weight of every breath was deafening. Rollins' hands trembled as he folded them in his lap. "I'm sorry," he said, but his voice was barely audible. Hale didn't react, didn't move. He just looked at Titan, who was sitting in perfect stillness beside him, staring at Rollins like he had known this moment was inevitable. Hale placed a hand gently on Titan's head, fingers curling into the fur just above his ears. "You knew," he whispered. No one else heard it. But Titan blinked once, a quiet acknowledgement that in a room built on facts, sometimes it takes instinct to reveal the truth. The jury's shock. The jurors returned to the box slowly, as if the weight of the previous day had thickened the air, made their movements sluggish, uncertain. These were the same 12 who had once sat straight-backed, sure of their decision, convinced of Marcus Hale's guilt because the evidence had seemed clean, airtight, too perfect to question. But now, that certainty had curdled into something else. Regret. Some avoided Hale's eyes entirely, unable to meet. The gaze of the man they'd nearly condemned. One juror, a woman in her early 40s with trembling hands, kept dabbing at her cheeks with a crumpled tissue. She turned slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't know," she said to no one and everyone all at once. "We thought we were doing the right thing." The judge, his face grimmer than it had been all trial, banged the gavel just once. "In light of the new testimony and confirmed evidence tampering, this court hereby declares a mistrial in the case of the state versus Marcus Hale. All charges are vacated pending further investigation into the conduct of law enforcement and external actors." The words hit the room like a tremor. A collective exhale followed. Some gasped, others blinked, still processing. Reporters bolted from their seats, phones lifted like weapons of urgency, capturing every angle, every twitch of emotion. But Hale didn't move right away. He sat, still shackled, eyes not on the cameras, not on the judge, but on Titan. The old shepherd was watching him calmly, as if the world's noise had never mattered, as if he'd been waiting patiently for the truth to finally catch up to them. A bailiff approached, keys jangling as he unlocked Hale's restraints. The metal clinked to the floor, loud in the hush that followed. Hale stood slowly, flexing his wrists, but his posture didn't shift. No vindication, no rage, just stillness. The moment was his, but he didn't claim it. Instead, he knelt beside Titan, his knees hitting the courtroom floor as if gravity had finally relented. His hand found the side of Titan's face, rough fingers threading through fur that had grayed with time. "How did your dog know?" a reporter called out, pushing forward, camera light blinking. "How could he tell you were innocent?" Hale didn't look up. His forehead rested gently against Titan's. For a moment, they just breathed in the same space, the crowd vanishing behind the sound of a soft, steady heartbeat. "Because he's trained to sense what people try to hide," Hale said softly, the words falling from his lips like truth he didn't need to prove. "And he knew I was telling the truth." Titan blinked, one slow nod of instinct meeting understanding. In a room where lies had echoed off every wall, it had taken a dog's bark to break them. And now, for the first time in weeks, the silence that followed didn't feel like dread. It felt like peace. Behind the scenes, the man Titan had cornered was no journalist. Within hours of his arrest, his real identity unraveled like old thread. His name was Vincent Creel, a career manipulator with a rap sheet that read more like a dossier: fraud, coercion, blackmail. But this time, he hadn't been freelancing. He'd been hired. The fingerprints on the scheme led back to one of the state's most untouchable figures, Randolph Decker, a real estate developer with deep pockets and even deeper shadows. Hale had tried to bring him down once, back when the evidence was raw, the victims too afraid to speak, and the truth too slippery to hold. But Decker hadn't gone down. Instead, He'd gone hunting. Emails emerged first. Hacked from Creel's laptop, they revealed payment orders, surveillance notes, even a list of jurors' names with commentary on who might be soft enough to sway. Then came the wire transfers. Carefully masked, funneled through shell corporations, but eventually traced back to a single source: Decker's offshore account. The media pounced. What had started as a quiet trial became a wildfire. Every anchor had the same footage on repeat. Titan's bark slicing through the courtroom just before the verdict. Over and over, it played, first as spectacle, then as something sacred. Social media dubbed him the dog who stopped a sentence. Commentators compared him to legendary courtroom moments. There were think pieces, tributes, a mural. But in the eye of the storm, Marcus Hale remained quiet. He didn't give interviews. He didn't pose for cameras. When asked to speak at press conferences, he declined. "I'm not the one who spoke," he said once, nodding to Titan, who stood quietly at his side like he always did. While the world pointed its lenses and microphones toward him, Hale spent his days going over everything that had been missed. Documents, body cam footage, transcripts. Not because he didn't believe the storm was over, but because he knew better than most how quickly truth could be buried again. He'd been to that edge. He'd stared down the system, cuffed and silenced. He didn't need attention. He needed justice to finish what Titan had started. Behind the scenes, indictments began. Rollins turned state witness. 2 more detectives were suspended. Decker's legal team issued statements, then retractions, then silence. The DA's office scrambled. Internal Affairs opened a full investigation into the department's handling of Hale's case. But through it all, Hale's focus stayed the same. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Hale sat in his apartment, the file from the original Decker case in his lap. Titan lay beside him, head on Hale's boot, breathing slow and steady. Hale looked down at the old shepherd and smiled. Just once. "They think it's over," he said. Titan didn't move, just flicked an ear. Hale's voice dropped to a murmur. "But you and I both know, it's just beginning." A badge returned. The precinct looked different than Hale remembered. Same walls, same worn linoleum floors, same coffee pot that hadn't brewed a decent cup in years. But something had shifted. It wasn't the building. It was the people. Officers who once turned their backs now stood straighter when he passed, nodding with a quiet respect they hadn't shown before. Some clapped his shoulder. Others offered apologies in short, awkward bursts. But Hale wasn't here for handshakes. He was here for an answer. The chief stood waiting in the conference room, his uniform crisp, his jaw clenched, not with defiance, but with apology. He motioned for Hale to sit. Across the table lay Hale's badge, clean, polished, resting in a velvet-lined case like it was fresh from graduation day. Hale stared at it without reaching. The chief cleared his throat. "Internal review cleared you of all wrongdoing. Your name's clean. The brass wants you back. The public wants you back. Hell, even the mayor called me this morning." Hale said nothing. He looked down at Titan, who was sitting by the door, ears perked, gaze steady as always. "I didn't come to talk about what the public wants," Hale said quietly. "I came to talk about conditions." The chief raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" Hale nodded. "I'll take the badge. If Titan comes too." The chief leaned back slowly, arms crossing. For a long beat, he said nothing. Then a grin cracked across his weathered face. "You really think I'd bring you back without him?" He stood and walked over to Titan, kneeling beside the shepherd and rubbing his head. "This dog did more in one bark than half our department's done in a decade. He's earned it more than most officers I've known." Hale stepped forward. His fingers hovered above the badge for just a second before he lifted it from its case and pinned it to his chest. The weight was familiar, but heavier now, like it carried more than just authority. It carried redemption. The chief opened the door and gestured for them to follow. "Come on, the team's waiting." As they walked into the bullpen, every officer stood. Desks were left behind, phones unanswered. They clapped, first slow, then louder, rising into a standing ovation that echoed off the walls. Someone whistled. Another shouted, "Welcome back, Hale!" But the loudest sound came from Titan. One sharp bark, tail wagging just once, perfectly timed like a salute. Hale glanced down, smiling. "You know how to make an entrance?" Titan gave a soft huff, eyes bright. In that moment, it wasn't just about a job or a badge. It was about trust restored, loyalty rewarded, and a truth that no lie had managed to bury. Justice, it seemed, didn't always wear a robe or hold a gavel. Sometimes, it walked on four legs and barked at exactly the right time. The developer's fall. The courtroom was full again, but this time the tension was different, sharper, more expectant. The name on the docket wasn't Hale. It was Decker. Randolph Decker, billionaire developer, political donor, and the man who had tried to crush Marcus Hale beneath the weight of manufactured guilt. Now he sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a suit that couldn't hide the sweat beading along his hairline. The room buzzed with reporters and public interest. People who had once ignored the whispers around Decker now hanging on every word. Hale entered quietly, his presence drawing a wave of murmurs. But he didn't acknowledge them. He took his seat in the front row, and beside him, Titan climbed into place with silent authority, settling with his head up and eyes forward. The new prosecutor, a woman with ice in her stare and steel in her voice, walked past Hale and nodded once at the dog. "This time," she said as she turned to face the jury, "we're going to listen to those who can't speak and those who bark when it matters most." A few in the gallery chuckled, but even the laughter carried weight. Everyone remembered Titan. Everyone remembered the bark that stopped a sentence. Decker's legal team tried to stall, to cast doubt, to untangle the noose already tightening around their client. But the evidence was a landslide. Recordings, emails, testimonies. The fixer, Creel, now fully cooperating, told. The court everything, from the bribes to the surveillance to the explicit orders to frame Hale. "We needed him out of the way," Creel had said on the stand. "He was getting too close. And Decker, he doesn't like problems he can't buy." Hale didn't react. He didn't flinch. But Titan's ears shifted slightly every time Decker's name was spoken, like he remembered the scent of deceit. Like he recognized a predator. When Decker finally took the stand, his arrogance was cracked and fraying. He spoke in half-truths and deflections, trying to spin a story that no one believed anymore. The jury watched him the way a hawk watches something dying on the ground. And Titan, he didn't blink. When the verdict came, it didn't take long. The forewoman stood, voice clear. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." The room held still for a heartbeat, then exhaled. Decker's jaw slackened. His lawyers froze. Flashbulbs popped. But Titan, he simply perked his ears, gave a soft chuff, and then laid his head down like the chapter had finally closed. Hale leaned down and scratched behind his ear. "Told you we'd finish it," he murmured. There was no celebration, no victory dance, just justice, heavy and final, like the sound of a door slamming shut on years of corruption. And in the middle of it all, the one who had known before anyone else. Titan, the dog who listened without words and answered when no one else could. The bark that saved a life. The auditorium at the East Side Youth Center was packed with folding chairs and restless energy. But the room quieted the moment Marcus Hale stepped to the front. He didn't wear his uniform today. No badge, no polished shoes, just a plain jacket and worn jeans that matched the easy way he stood. Titan walked beside him, steady and calm, his harness gleaming under the stage lights. The kids had been rowdy all morning, laughing, whispering, tugging at each other's sleeves. But now they leaned forward, their eyes bouncing between Hale and the massive German shepherd at his side. Hale glanced around the room, taking it in, the chipped paint on the walls, the smell of cafeteria food lingering in the air, the kind of place where you learn who you are before the world tries to tell you differently. "I'm not here to talk about myself," he began, his voice low but sure. "I'm here because of him." He placed a hand on Titan's back, fingers curling into the thick fur that had become his anchor through chaos and doubt. There was a moment not that long ago when everything I'd built, everything I believed in, was about to be erased. And all it would have taken was silence. But Titan didn't stay silent. He barked. The kids laughed softly, and Titan wagged his tail once like he knew he was the punchline. Hale's face softened. He barked when it mattered most, and because of that, a lie unraveled, and the truth found daylight. A girl in the front row, maybe 9 years old, missing a front tooth, raised her hand timidly. "How did he know you were innocent?" Hale paused. The room was quiet again. He knelt beside Titan, one hand still resting on the old dog's shoulder. Because dogs don't care about politics or power. They don't care about money or lies. They care about people. And they know when someone's telling the truth, even when no one else wants to hear it. The girl nodded like she understood more than she let on. Titan, ever the professional, let her scratch behind his ears. Later that week, a crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled, but the noise faded as the curtain was drawn back. A bronze statue stood tall. Titan captured in motion, mouth open mid-bark, muscles tensed, eyes fixed forward. Hale stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching the crowd as they read the plaque at the base. It was simple, but it said everything. Sometimes, justice speaks. And sometimes, it barks. Titan sat beside the statue, head high, as if he recognized his own likeness and the weight it carried. Hale leaned down, whispering so only Titan could hear. "You didn't just save me. You reminded everyone that truth doesn't always wear a badge or sit on a bench. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes it barks when the world needs it most." Titan licked his hand once, quiet as ever. But that was all the answer Hale needed.